Thank you to our two first speakers, Michaela and Oliver, and now I would like to welcome our next speaker, Melissa de Zwart. Melissa is a professor at Adelaide Law School and the Deputy Director of the Research Unit in Military Law and Ethics. She's involved in international projects dealing with surveillance, big data, space law, technology, and commercialisation. Prior to academia, Melissa specialised in technology transfer and licensing of intellectual property at the CSIRO. Here, she became an expert in legal issues arising from the use of digital technology, ranging from intellectual property to privacy and surveillance. Melissa's research interests include copyright, fair dealing, surveillance, new technologies, content regulation, online games, social networking, governance of online environments, digital identity, new media, convergence, and the commercialisation of space. It's with this rich history that it'll be very fascinating to hear from Melissa of her perspectives of the digital image in the social realm.
So after that introduction, I need to give you a disclaimer. I'm not going to be talking to you about space. So thank you very much. It's already been a fabulous session this morning with lots of things I can see that we're going to be able to talk about on the panel. So I am going to be talking to you very much in the context of the issue of the voice of the artist. So last year I was involved in a project where we interviewed a whole range of Australian creators about the impact of digital distribution on their artistic practices, but particularly on their revenue stream and the difficulties that they were encountering in shifting to legitimate digital distribution models and whether they were in fact making any money from those legitimate authorised digital distribution models. And largely I think we were we found that the people who came forward to talk to us were largely from the music industry. So this year we are engaging in, thanks to the Copyright Agency, a project which looks at user practices and attitudes in the social media platform, specifically of Instagram. And so we are looking at the experiences and the difficulties in particular faced by Australian artists, photographers, small business owners who are again, and it's a big issue here about whether they are making use of social media platforms like Instagram by choice or whether it is essentially an option that is being imposed upon them by, as we can see, the evolving digital platform. So it's either use the digital platform or get left behind. So, photographers make a very interesting case study here in terms of once their image is digitised, then it can appear literally thousands of times across the web in unremunerated uses, and there have been many instances of that. So the purpose of this project is to gain an understanding of what the difficulties are that are encountered by these people in terms of understanding intellectual property issues, how they can go about protecting their work, but also how they can go about maximising the use of the platform. So I need to tell you that this is going to be a very word-rich presentation for two reasons. One is I'm a lawyer and we're all about words. The second reason is because I am telling you I'm not showing you the images of the creators, but I want you to hear their voice about their experience of the difficulties that they're encountering in making this shift. So we're looking particularly at Instagram just because in the early discussions that we had in scoping this project, this was the platform that came up over and over again. So we talked about Flickr, we talked about Tumblr, we talked about Pinterest, but Instagram seems to be one that has taken off in particular in terms of sharing. So just briefly, it has a community of over 400 million users. There's a huge amount of non-commercial use, but the line blurs. And I think that image of, very much, and my kids do it, they sit there on the couch at night time and they do this. And I think, wow, all of that creative, artistic endeavour that's gone into each one of those pictures that they're just going like this past. And what does that say? And I think that feeds into what was said earlier this morning about what does that say about how we are consuming creative product now, that we feel like it's perfectly okay just to do that to it. So that's sort of another issue that comes up. There have already been a couple of high-profile legal issues to do with the reuse, the use in its loosest sense, of images that appear on Instagram. And you are probably all aware of the artist Richard Prince, who had this exhibition where he took images from Instagram and he changed, so he didn't manipulate the image in any way, he didn't do anything different except for manipulating the comment stream that appears below the photo, so that under each one, near the top of the comments, there is some kind of comment made by Prince. So that is essentially his contribution to this. So then printed them on fine art paper, hung them up in the gallery, and sold them for a significant amount of money. Now, there's been a lot of backlash and a lot of commentary about this. He didn't seek any permission from any of the people whose images that he used, and there was a mixture here of professional artists, photographers, models, and just people who use Instagram just for fun and recreation. So he is currently the subject of a copyright action relating to a number of these images. Some of the other people who had their images used in this way or reproduced in this way have done other things, like tried to undercut him on price. They printed their own pictures and said, well, you can buy it from me for $50 rather than $500,000. So it sparked a spectrum of responses to how to handle this. Now, of course, Prince is no stranger to controversy over the issue of fair use in copyright, and Prince has said things like, "Copyright has never interested me." Well, I'm not going to make any comment on that. This is one of the earlier subjects where Prince literally took a book of photographs which had been prepared by Cariou over a number of years by living with the Rastafarian people, and Prince bought the book in a bookshop and then used it to make a range of new images for his own exhibition, some of which were found to be infringing and some of them were not. This was not the first time he'd been before the courts. You may recall earlier copyright infringement actions which had to do with a string of puppies which reproduced a postcard that he'd found in a gallery. So what I'm saying is that this is not a particularly new issue in terms of Prince and the art spectrum, but where it is becoming an issue is for people who are using Instagram to develop a business, particularly if they're dealing with setting up an interior design business or an arts and crafts business or a fashion business, and they are being prompted to use the Instagram platform to publicise and to distribute their work. So why is it an issue? Briefly, because of the fact that copyright gives you exclusive rights over your work, and these include the right to reproduce it in material form, a la Prince, the right to publish the work, so to choose the first place of publication, and the right to communicate the work to the public, which is the online-based right. Now, as we know, if you do any of the acts that are comprised within the copyright without the permission of the copyright owner, then that constitutes an infringement. But we are currently at the crossroads here in Australia at the moment because of the significant efforts that have been directed towards considering whether Australia has too restrictive copyright law following the entry into the US Free Trade Agreement in particular. There's a huge amount of copyright bashing, I think, that goes on. Copyright is almost friendless, I would say, in terms of people who are willing to to really stand up and express the voice of people in the creative industry who have to earn their living by making these creative works. It seems to me that it's extremely easy to say that we pay too much for content in Australia, that it's all about returning money to the people who made it, that it's all, that copyright is a victimless crime, all of those things that we've heard 1,000 times before. But we are, yet again facing the recommendation by the Productivity Commission, who has recommended that we shift to a US fair use style defence. So these things are becoming increasingly important. So also, I want to flag to you, without dwelling on it for too long, because it comes out in the voice of the creators that we talk to, is we do have moral rights protection in Australia, but it's little understood, and there have been very few judicial considerations of how the moral rights provisions of the Copyright Act can be applied. And often, as we'll see in the online context, that what people really want and really need is attribution for the reproduction of their image, more than, a small licensing fee. So we're in the middle of this project at the moment, and I'm kind of doing a bit of a plug to people as well, to say if you are interested in contributing to our project, if you use Instagram in some way to distribute or to publicise your material, we'd be very interested in talking to you. Now, one thing we just need to pause and observe is the fact that social media platforms and specifically platforms like Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, etc., are very much a product of a decision that was made in the US in the early 90s, when the white paper looked at the question of shifting from a closed internet to opening it up to commercial interests. And the US government, which had maintained the backbone of the internet up until that point, in Australia it was CSIRO and the universities, wanted to open that up to commercial traffic. So they had to make a decision about how they could encourage commercial players to come into the market. The big thing that they were worried about at this point in time, the capacity to have visually rich content on the internet, so certainly before movies, etc., was the fact that internet service providers were very worried about being sued for defamation. Okay, so remember, this is largely a text-based environment. So the US government created the Safe Harbour scheme, which was then continued into the copyright regime, which essentially has facilitated a business model for ISPs, which is, and service providers and platform providers like Instagram, which is post first and ask questions later. So the model is that they are not, or they disclaim any responsibility for content that is hosted on their site. And they say, if we host anything that is, belongs to you, that is offensive, that is your copyright material, you contact us and we'll take that material down. And their argument is that if they didn't have that business model, it is unsustainable, because they couldn't employ enough people to manually check through images or postings or status updates or videos or whatever it is to determine whether that material is protected by copyright or offensive or defamatory or whatever it is. So it's essentially that business model is one that was made to encourage internet service providers into the market in the early to mid-90s. And this is the model that results in this post first, ask questions later, and we'll take it down, safe harbour model of social media. So let's move on then to listen to what it is that people have been experiencing in terms of being pushed to use Instagram. So when I talked to the musicians last year, the industry is in the position where people were being encouraged, pushed or required to make use of online services like SoundCloud, etc. So whether they wanted to or not, go on, make your music available through this platform and you'll earn a royalty. The stories that we heard was that the return was extremely small. The issue that we're dealing with in our discussion of people's use of Instagram is this issue of choice. Do creators, artists, photographers have a choice anymore about whether they use these digital platforms to possibly curate in some instances, in some reviews that I've heard, that they are required by the people that they are licensing or selling their images to, for example, only to do that through an online platform. So if you're not on Flickr, you won't be able to distribute your imagery through that particular end user. So the issue of choice, I think, is a really good one, because people often say something like, well, if you don't want your stuff copied and redistributed, don't put it online. Well, I'm not sure that we're in a marketplace anymore where we can say effectively to artists and creative individuals or businesses, don't put your stuff online, because how on earth are you going to make a business? So the message that we're hearing is that Instagram is now one of the primary forms of marketing in the fashion industry. Whilst it's great, it's also become so competitive that businesses who are not engaging with their audiences via social media are now struggling to survive. So if you are concerned about the copying or the reuse or the uncredited use of your work or republication of your work, this is a problem for you. It's going to be extremely difficult for you to make a decision to opt out of the social media world. And I suppose it's a bit like the message that we sort of send to teenagers about use of social media. Oh well, if it's happening, if there's cyberbullying, if you're traumatised what's going on, well, opt out. And the message, of course, that we get back is, well, that's like sort of opting out of a friendship group. So if we are going to require our Australian creators to use these platforms, what are the experiences that they are having? So the purposes that people make use of Instagram for include things like publicity, developing a personality, responding to customer feedback, making sales, but also monitoring. And this comes through too as an important point, monitoring what uses are being made of your material downstream. So certainly you get widespread uses, and it is now being recognised as being a key driver of sales online. However, beyond this, it seems to be that it's definitely an expectation amongst the target group that an online store will give access or be available via a whole range of online platforms. So in other words, one of the things that the creator is going to have to do is to put some energy into deciding what their online presence is going to look like. So this may involve, for example, using a professional photographer or making decisions about how it is they're going to style what it is that they're going to do. So of course, as I've said, once you put these images online, the issue is that they are then subject to or available to very easy reposting. So how do they go about dealing with the issue of, or the knowledge that, or the whole purpose of these online platforms being the capacity to repost? So there are certain strategies that they can adopt, certain methodologies that they can use, such as watermarking the photos, but of course this reduces the attractiveness of them. The issue about how you feel about whether your images are going to be reused, and I'll get onto that in a minute. So one of the things that I think is really interesting is that, again, you're creating a new set of practices whereby not only is there an expectation that the creator has a presence, say, on Instagram, but it then develops an expectation very rapidly of a feedback loop. So the use of tagging and hashtags and crediting people is creating new social practices, not only whereby the creator is promoting or disclosing or distributing their work one way, that there is then an expectation that if people make some use of that, particularly say if there's a product, that you will then acknowledge or repost their photograph as a way of saying thank you. So there are user expectations. So whether, again, the sort of point that I want to draw from this is whether they want to or not, creators will be pushed to engage with the platform beyond merely a sort of one-way distribution model. So there have already been instances that I'm sure you're aware of where there have been issues about people using images, say a branded fashion item, and then that being picked up and being reused by the brand itself. So you have this issue about, well, we're happy for our images to be shared. Now, of course, the question then becomes, were you happy for it to be shared provided that it is attributed? Are you happy for it to be shared provided that it is unaltered? Are you happy for it to be shared provided that it doesn't have some derogatory tag, for example, or that it has had your name taken off it, or there's all sorts of issues beyond just simply sharing the image as it appears. So we've been asking the creators about how they feel about this sort of feedback loop, this issue of sharing. And they're really still working through how they feel about this. It seems to be good, that sort of issue of any publicity is good publicity is still filtering through, provided, of course, that you can see that, does it align with our brand value? Does it align with what it is that we are hoping to the message we're intending to send? Is it a good thing to be sharing in this way? What happens then if someone has had a negative experience where your work has been copied or reposted? And certainly there have been instances in this. So what do you do about it? And I think generally the message that is coming through is that the most that you can do is politely make a request for the image to be attributed or to be removed. Instagram itself only has a sort of very simple complaint policy that you can write to them and say, oh, we think this is our copyright image, can you take it down? But probably by that point, it's gone anyway, because you think again about how Instagram is used. It's this constant stream. So it just continues, the flow goes on and on and on. So, having it removed from the stream from 2 days ago doesn't really give you much of a practical outcome. So one of the things that is it having some kind of a slightly positive outcome? If they're continuing to repost your things, is it at least attracting some attention to the legitimate business? And generally the message is we're unsure of how to follow this up. We're really unsure about how to deal with this. I've mentioned this one about the practices of the additional issues of where a customer might take a photo of themselves wearing a particular item or using a particular item, and if they tag themselves, can the creator then make a use of that image? And exactly what sort of permission is implied when you tag someone in a photo? And I think this is really the issue of etiquette. Where do we go from here? These are the unknowns. And so really the answer to this is, at the moment for creators, is they're simply unsure of what to do. So what we're hoping to, as part of this project, is to develop a clearer set of rules of the road, essentially, for the use of Instagram by Australian creators to maximise the benefit that they have. Now I'm just going to skip through a couple of these comments and just finish up by talking about something that's already been mentioned, which is the power of the hashtag and the ability to flag or to acknowledge the origins of an image that is then reposted. And there are some generalised tags that people use, such as source unknown, or I've taken this from Pinterest. That must be really reassuring in terms of copyright. I've infringed this from somewhere else. Some people said that they would follow or check tags to see if they could track their images, But remember, of course, a lot of the time that these are very small businesses or one individual creator who simply doesn't have the time to trawl through social media to see what use is being made of their copyright material. So even regarding when they have somebody take photographs, professional photographs of their creative material, they're unsure. So, you know, I'm not going to get into the issue of who owns copyright in photographs, but you'd think that would be something that would be dealt with before you thought about putting the images online. But, you know, this whole issue of, well, I've paid for it, so I think I own it, but I'm not really sure. So, in other words, it's really quite a mess. So, just to conclude then about where we're up to in our conversations with creators about the use of Instagram. I like this one. I've always been a fan of crediting the source, and I think it's polite to do so. I think that's very true. What are the perceived risks and benefits? Very much this correlates with the Voice of the Artist survey, and I think it highlights the fact that we are moving into an area where you have a legitimate digital distribution model. They exist, that creators are genuinely, and this is the same thing with musicians, they're genuinely willing to become engaged in these digital distribution models. But the capacity for them to get any real revenue from them is extremely small, and the amount of effort that has to go into them is very large. So certainly they're going to get exposure. It could be cost-effective marketing depending on how long it takes them to put, you know, the energy and effort into creating the images. It certainly builds brand awareness. It enables them to connect easily with influencers. It's a visual platform. It's a way in which you can develop some real online personality and a follower. Certainly people feel like they have a personal connection with the artists, and it creates that sort of feedback loop, as I've said. However, I think there's also still very much the risk of losing control of how your images are used, both from a copyright and a moral rights perspective. It can also create issues of feeling insecure if you're not getting enough likes. That's a well-documented risk as well, like, oh, is my art really not that good? But maybe you're just posting it at the wrong time of day. Possibility of copying is, of course, huge, and of course it gives away information about how what your creative works are that can make them more vulnerable to copying. So that's sort of where we're at with the project at the moment. We'd certainly be very interested in hearing from any creators who are using Instagram. And as I say, what we're really hoping to do is to put this together into very much a practical how-to guide for creators about how they can use Instagram and other social media platforms effectively and for their benefit. So thank you.